My name is Patrick J. McGinnis, and I coined the term FOMO. That's short for fear of missing out, and it's why some people end up following the crowd. But we're not like them. We're part of a new species that isn't afraid to do things differently. I call us FOMO Sapiens. And this is the show where you'll meet people like us, phenomenal FOMO Sapiens, to learn how they find the courage and the ideas to live exceptional lives. FOMO. FOMO. Hey everybody, welcome back to FOMO Sapiens, the show for people who don't just follow the crowd, but instead take their own path to success in business and in life. I'm your host, Patrick J. McGinnis, venture capitalist by day, author and podcaster by night, and FOMO Sapiens 24/7. Now we're coming up on the end of the year. We've been talking about bold thinkers all season in season 8. And I just want to end with a couple episodes about resilience and about, just the power of the human spirit. It's been a long couple of years with the pandemic, with just a lot of instability. We got a recession, we got a war. There's just a lot of reasons to feel a little frustrated, a little down maybe, sort of doubt what's going on in this world. But I hope that the next 2 weeks will give you stories that you find super inspiring, because they certainly did for me. They inspired me, they taught me things, and you're just going to get, I think, a new perspective. And our guest today is Mike Ott. And Mike is somebody I knew socially, actually. I met him a couple of years back through some mutual friends. And then I lost track of him. And I heard he had been through some really harrowing life experience. So we met up for dinner and he told me his story. And I was sitting there in shock. Just my mouth was hanging open. This was about a year ago, actually. It was a warm night in December, believe it or not. And we were just getting into it, the story he's going to tell today. And I don't even know. My reaction was just shock. I actually kind of teared up a lot. It just moved. Every time I talk to Mike these days, I just sort of get a little teary because his story is so amazing. And I want him to share it with you today. So that's why I had him on the show. We're going to talk about how Mike Ott's recovery from paralysis changed his perspective. Now, Mike began his career in the investment industry with Bessemer Trust and initially focused on business development, and then he moved on to DPM Capital, an equity-focused hedge fund, as a research analyst and trader, where he went on to lead the firm's research and trading activities. In July of 2019, he sustained a spinal cord injury in an accident and was initially quadriplegic. Through dedicated rehab over 2 years, Mike regained his abilities to walk, run, jog, and use his hands, all during the pandemic, this rehab. Believe it or not. He celebrated his recovery by completing a journey through Africa in the summer of 2021, and then returned to the investment industry as a consultant for Endurance Partners, a PE firm, private equity. He is currently focused on writing, travel, and consulting within the investment industry. And by the way, one thing that is not in Mike's bio, but is super important, is that he is from the state of Maine, just like yours truly. So I always just have a soft spot for the Mainers, and I'm always very happy to have somebody from Maine on the show. Now, here's what you're going to learn. First of all, just the story of how this went down, it's harrowing. So I just really want you to hear it, just what his experience was like, what it was like to suddenly become a quadriplegic. It's insane. Next, we're going to hear about his recovery and all the things he had to do. He was so entrepreneurial. I could go on and on all day about how amazing this is. I really need to stop because it's not productive for you, but the entrepreneurial thinking that he put into action in his recovery, just getting around the corners, facing the obstacles in order to move forward. It's really it's a great example for all of us. And finally, he's going to share his new perspective, what he learned and how he's living his life now. What's different, what's the same, what we can learn from him. All right. Now, the small ask this week, since we're getting towards the holidays, I'm not going to ask for anything for myself. It's rude to ask for presents. I just ask you to do something nice for somebody. Okay, give them a nice gift, give some money to charity, hit the subscribe button on their podcast, something like that. All right. And now on to the interview. As you know, I like to start every interview with the same question, and Mike was no exception. So I started our conversation by asking him this. What's a formative decision you've had to make to get to where you are today?
For me, it was just to continue. Keep working, keep trying, keep experimenting. And I had to make it over and over again. But that was it. And there was no shortage of obstacles, pain, uncertainty, insurance, pandemics, so on and so forth. But the bottom line was every day you just had to get up and fight on.
Yeah, and we'll be talking about this throughout the episode. But as I said in the intro, Mike experienced a traumatic injury that changed his life and we're going to talk about that process because it is an incredible story that when I've heard it for the first time, we were having dinner, having not seen each other for years. You told me the story. I didn't know what to do. I felt a lot of feelings. Like I thought I was going to fall over out of amazement, but also like it was incredible. So I'm excited to get into this conversation. To get started, Mike, let's go back to July 26th, 2019. Tell me about what's going on in your life.
Sure. So it was a pretty ordinary summer day for me. I was leading the research and trading operation at a hedge fund that was headquartered in New York, and was walking to work from West Village, and, kind of did my 10-minute stroll up Hudson Street and logged in and did what I needed to do for the day. And we kind of had a big comeback year and logged out and threw a duffel over my shoulder to go to the train station and see some friends. And, went down and saw some of the closest people that I have in my life. And, as happens all too often, we, enjoyed the day and then went for a swim later at night and dove right into shallow water. And I remember right at that moment just hearing this thud. And that was the only sensation, was just the sound of it. And it was like the rest of your body just vanished. There was no feeling, no movement, nothing. And then gratefully, my friends kind of came in and turned me over.
And so you're underwater, and did you realize, we were like, I can't move, or was it also fast? Because how long were you under the water?
It's hard to say exactly, and I've never actually asked anyone's opinion on that. Yeah. But, you realize pretty quickly what's happening. You heard the impact, and, you kind of could see through the murky water that my arms are just kind of dangling there, and you're keenly aware. It was like your sort of head is on earth, but your body's in heaven. And it registered pretty quickly that, I was quadriplegic from breaking my neck.
And so you're pulled at least up to the surface. And what happens next? Because how many people were there, and like, how did they process? Like, what were the decisions that they made, and how did that impact like the sort of the next stage of the evening?
Yeah, it was absolutely amazing. So the person who had rescued me had really had, no formal training or anything, but he might have been a lifeguard in a previous life or something. And, while I'm underwater, sort of preparing to cross into the next realm and sort of giving thanks for my friends and family and the experiences I had had and everything, he's just sort of waiting up next to my body and turns me over very slowly. And then, I get to breathe. And then he kept me in the water, which was a key decision, not causing any further damage. And then we had another guy with us who could play the guitar. So, we called the ambulance, obviously. We're just kind of waiting there. And, I got to put in the song request. So we listened to Landslide on the guitar and sort of got some live music until the paramedics came. And then they, kind of strapped me to a board and took me into the ambulance onto the hospital. And, again, just a huge stroke of luck, which plays a role in a lot of these stories, was 20 minutes drive from University of Maryland, which has an amazing surgery center.
Yeah. I think it's like the people who live to tell their stories are the ones who are in the spot, like where they're able to, they have the luck, right? Like if you weren't lucky and you were in the middle of the Serengeti, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. So you're lying in the water. You realize like you're a quadriplegic. What are you thinking?
There's sort of before you're turned over and after you're turned over, right? And sort of before I'm turned over, I didn't really have, time to think about, well, what if I get rescued? You kind of had to make peace with the fact that this might be it. And, I thought immediately of friends and family and relationships, and that's what had really mattered and kind of given a lot of color to my life. And, sort of vaguely think about experiences. And then you kind of go on to, if this is judgment day for me, I, hope I was decent enough, and it's a bit of a Pascal's wager. And then, at that point I was sort of turned over. And then, on the other side, you sort of, get a few breaths of air and you realize, I'm alive, but I'm quadriplegic. And to me, I thought that was going to be for life right then and there. And so, I thought immediately, okay, I need to be the best family member and friend that I can and still just try and be good company. And And then obviously you think about parents and stuff and what they were going to have to go through. But, those were the initial reactions.
It's funny, like you didn't mention work. You know what? Did you think about
no.
work?
No, I mean, I didn't think about it. It didn't really register. I mean, I guess until, it's at some point where you're sort of stabilized in intensive care and, all that. And you're kind of like, oh, yeah, about that whole thing. But no, that took a while to even cross my mind.
Yeah, I mean, nobody, you never hear that. Like people are like having near-death experience. Nobody's like, you know what I thought about? Like, I had the spreadsheet that I wanted to finish, right? Not that work isn't important, but it's like you go to these other places entirely. FOMO. So let's get into the recovery, because just before we do that, talk about where you are today, because I'm looking at you. We're on a podcasting software. You're up in the state of Maine, the greatest state in the world, obviously, and you
Hands
look
down
amazing. And
thank you.
You run a sub 9 minute mile, I believe, probably faster than that now, but like you are doing things that a lot of people can't do. How do you feel? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it comes and goes. So that I was running, the day of that accident, a 5:20 mile, and wow. To run something like a 9 now takes far more input than that, near 5 ever did. But you feel grateful to be alive now. And the analogy that I make sometimes is like you're a race car, kind of rebuilt from a totaled set of parts. I mean, it's not perfect and there's a lot of pain and kind of different quirks, but I'm so grateful for the opportunity to get up and work on it every day that, I keep getting better. And, like you said, I mean, I've been fortunate to travel the world and kind of run a 9 minute mile and do my PADI certification, scuba diving, and just keep the adventure going.
So it's a good point. So it's not that you're completely back, that's like nothing ever happened, but you can live a full life based on the recovery that you've made.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, and that's my opinion. And I think I really sort of made that choice for myself, long after I'd really had this huge comeback. And it took 2 years really to get to that point where I felt like, okay, I'm no longer just in battle mode. I can really, live a full life. And for me, that happened on this kind of, 5-day overnight hike that I had taken in South Africa, where, again, I'd put in all the work for hours a day and you're sort of in warehouses. And then I thought, okay, what if you get, out of those environments and go test yourself and see what you're made of now? And so I sort of ventured off into the wilderness, on the very southern point of Africa by myself and kind of, battled my way through a little 5-day trek and came out the other end and thought, okay, you know what? I can really do this. And, there's a lot of pain and there were a lot of points where you wanted to kind of quit and get out of there. But, that's what I wake up every day is, you don't have a quote unquote perfect body, but neither does anybody, right?
Totally. So let's talk about that recovery, because listen, I understand definitely a part of it is effort, but also part of it is circumstance. Like some people just, even if they put in all the work in the world, they wouldn't be able to achieve the improvement that you've seen, but you have had this incredible improvement. Take us through, I think, I'd love to just focus first on those first couple of months. And you're in the hospital. It's bright, it's noisy, you can't move, you're surrounded by doctors, you don't know, really, you have no sense of what's going to happen. Like if we think this is a show about decision making, like what were the decisions that you had to make and how did you sort of make it through that period of time and what was the focus?
Yeah. I mean, and to your point, on luck, I mean, I often tell people too that like my story was like having to flip a coin 100 times in a row and get heads every time. And I did. I mean, I had a great rescue. I had incredible surgery. I was in a great intensive care unit. And then I, went on to a great hospital and then, found all the resources I needed. And then, yes, poured, every ounce of effort on top of that to make all the ingredients work. But, you kind of come to an intensive care. And like you said, you're sort of looking up at like these white fissured ceiling tiles and there's bright lights. And I was on a ventilator, so you can't speak and you can't move. And so the only way to really communicate with the outside world is a nurse is holding like a laminated keyboard in front of your face, mm-hmm. right? And she'll run her finger across, he or she, and starting with Q, and then you're supposed to blink on the letter that you want to use to spell words, and that's your only way to kind of speak to the world. And then, very slowly, I mean, it's sort of like end of life care in reverse. you're coming off of like this life support. And so you get, off of a ventilator and you still can't move. But I'll never forget that just first breath of fresh air and just being like, wow, this is just the best. I mean, this is everything. And then, you get your first sip of water and you're just like, well, wow, that's good stuff. And, they really didn't tell me much at the onset, and they tend not to because it's nebulous and they don't know, but kind of behind closed doors, they were telling, my parents like, hey, he might be able to walk in a year. So I had that prognosis. And then, in my own mind, I remember the first time that I could actually like fall asleep, or one of the first times. And I had this dream that I was back in this lacrosse tournament I had played in Mexico City a couple of years prior. And it was the last time I'd ever actually played. And, I was back in that moment, and then I woke up from that and I could sort of move like my right foot a little bit. And I was like,
wow,
what? It's in there somewhere. Let's go get it, and that was sort of the beginning.
It's amazing to me how that moment of the dream, and then you wake up and you're able to sort of move your foot, like that body mind connection is I just don't even know what to do with that. But I guess you probably had a lot of moments like that where you started to realize like the psychology and the body was much more deeply connected than you'd ever thought before.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah. I mean, so, intensive care, I was sort of stuck there, and they don't have necessarily what you need in intensive care to, hoist you in harnesses and give you 3 hours a day of therapy and give you everything you need to kind of get going again. But, they have some people that can sort of work with you. And I remember, at one point they were like, we're just going to try and get you to stand up. And, I couldn't move, right? You can't lift forked mouth. You kind of can't really do anything. And we're like, oh, okay, let's give it a go. And so they take me up in this, crane called a Hoyer lift and plop me down into a wheelchair. And, these people come in, and this one therapist, gets her arms under my shoulders and says, I'm just going to yank you on the count of 3 and do everything I can. And we tried a couple times. It was 1, 2, 3 and just fail, right? 1, 2, 3, no go. I mean, she couldn't lift me. I had nothing in my legs. And all of a sudden, my mom walks in the room, and, we do the 1, 2, 3 one more time, and just bam, you're up for 2 seconds, basically someone else holding all your body weight. But nonetheless, it happens that you plop back down. And the whole journey was kind of full of those moments. I mean, I spent a couple months in total in hospitals, the second one being Spalding Rehab in Boston, which was an incredible experience. And it was filled with things like that where, you couldn't quite do something and then, for whatever reason, a loved one or someone came by and you were able to get it done.
FOMO. So what happens? So you get out of the hospital, you go to rehab, and then lucky you, this is you. I mean, like, it just kind of like add another thing. COVID comes along. And so I have to think that was disruptive. Like, how did you think of, I'm curious, like when COVID happened, were you like way more chill than the rest of us? Cause you're like, you know what? Like I almost died. And so like, COVID, like it may be pretty bad, but I've already been through a lot this year. Or how did it affect your mental state?
It's interesting, because they say like, when you're in the hospital and you're sort of on month 2 and getting ready to go out there, like you're about to face the hardest part, just a heads up. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like the pain's getting better. And like, I just learned to walk again a little bit. Like, you got to be kidding. And then, you get out and you realize like the real world is a tough place and you're beat up and you got to find a way to survive. And the playbook for, making the full recovery that I wanted, didn't exist. I just had to make it up. Right. So, I had to go find all these people and trainers and, conduct experiments and just build the 4 hours a day of work that I was going to put in. And COVID sort of threw that all out of whack. Basically everything gets canceled. Right. And so for anyone trying to, get healthcare in that time, I mean, I know it was really hard for anyone going through like chemo treatments or whatever. And, a lot of people were able to kind of take their laptops to the Hamptons. But for me, it was just the singularity of the purpose that kind of kept me going. So I, just started trekking up and down stairwells. And thankfully I had someone, a PT who was willing to work with me kind of behind closed doors and just turn the lights off and lock the place and kind of hush and keep going. You just found a way to grind through it. And it almost, didn't matter. You just adapted.
Talk about the creativity of that, because I remember you told me you hired a high school track coach to teach you how to run again. Like, how did you would it be that you encounter a problem and just try to think creatively about how to solve it? Like, because you really did have to kind of improvise.
Yeah, you kind of plug away and you have to improvise. And so, the running was like a project that I was working on right as COVID sort of hit. And you have like all these, fancy, expensive PTs that are working with professional athletes and stuff. And I just wasn't quite getting there yet, but felt like, okay, it's close. And then obviously, all that gets blown up with COVID, and moved home to our lovely state of Maine. And you're kind of sitting here in square one. And you're like, okay, I'm in the basement with my grandmother's trainer, and I'm like streaming videos, and Amazon exercise equipment sold out. Like, what do I do now? And so you just think, I want to run track coach, and start asking around town, and got the number for a local guy, Sean Anderson, who became an incredible friend. And we just set a time, and he showed up, and he looks at me, he's like, "Ooh boy, this is a bigger project than I thought." And we started just trying, and showed up day in, day out. And that was full of lots of stumbles and face plants. I mean, every single time you try and jog like 2-3 steps, my left foot would catch, and then, your body tees up on the way down and just be face plant. And you just kind of endure enough of those, and get a little bit further each time. And that's how it began.
Now, tell us what was going on with your kind of professional life at this point, because obviously recovery is a full-time job, but you had been working. I remember your office of your fund was like 2 doors down from where I worked, except your place was way nicer. And I was always like, what's going on in there? So like, what happened professionally, and like, what, while you were recovering?
Yeah. So, I mean, we had a great spot in the meatpacking district and everything. And like you said, kind of walking to work, and I had been promoted a couple times, and, we were sort of off to the races with a small group of people running a hedge fund. And, they had to hire a replacement right away when I was in the hospital. So I had been working on, building out a list of potential hires, and, the next day, or, whenever, as quickly as possible, someone was in my seat. And then, it was kind of put to me, like, if, you're back in 90 days, let's talk about it. But if not, that's going to be it for you. And so, that was it for me. And, I was kind of let go, and then had, to deal with all that, and, mentally, and then, sort of get on to focusing everything on, what I did have. And that's, one of the great lessons out of this whole experience is be grateful for what's given. And, okay, I lost something, but I was given carte blanche to go do what I needed to do. So, professionally, you're just kind of focusing on getting better. And then, after I conquered that project, got back into financial work, and kind of consulted for some private equity firms and things like that, and have taken on new projects since. And you just find a way to rebuild.
So now that you're back at work, you're feeling good, what is it like after? Because, your life is consumed by something, and then you're sort of like, well, okay, now what, right? Like, what is my life going to look like? Because you are given in many ways a gift, which is the opportunity to really figure out what matters to you. And I have to imagine that it's like, not like you're Scrooge. I'm not going to call you Scrooge because you're an amazing guy, but Scrooge does the whole thing. He has the ghost of Christmas past, ghost of Christmas future, and he wakes up, and all of a sudden he's like no longer a Scrooge. He's like giving everybody the money. And I'm curious,
Right.
like, you have been through this transformational experience. Like, what did it change about what you want to do with your life?
So it's really interesting. I mean, it's a trial and error process, almost exactly like, learning to walk again or run again or anything. I mean, I think, anyone that's been through something like this, or, I was just speaking with my grandmother earlier, who just finished writing a book and has put years into that. And you kind of, focus on just one thing for so long, and then it's done. And you kind of have to figure out, like, okay, what do I do now, and what matters? And so, I know before I left on my first travel, I was kind of, getting a drink with an old coworker, and had this moment of, hey, I'm about to go do something I never could have done beforehand. And I'd always been at my desk kind of dreaming of, like, what if I go spend a month in Africa, or just kind of journey through all these far and remote places that I never had the ability to see. And so that was something I just went and tackled. And, swam with great whites, and did these incredible hikes, and kind of went through Tanzania and Kenya, and saw the Great Migration, and went to Lebanon on election day, and, saw shots in the air and everything, and, different parts of the Middle East, and, tons of hiking, and went out and saw nature and really the world, and went out to embrace it. And so that was something that was important to me. And obviously, you have a renewed focus on the loved ones that help get you through that whole thing. And so just enjoying being with the people that are in your life every day has become hugely important. And then obviously, kind of balancing all that out with work and, creating new projects in the financial world, and also doing a bunch of writing, starting to tell the story, a little bit like someone you might know.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I certainly didn't have the same degree of challenge, but in my own way, of course, went through my own metamorphosis. And I think when you go through a change in your life, I think writing is really important, because a former guest on the show, Bruce Feiler, very aptly said that when you're in transition, like, we all have a story of our life. I'm Patrick. I do this. I live here. I do these things. This matters to me. And when your life changes, you may not know the story anymore. And in order to move forward, you need to rewrite the story. And so, like, literally going through the act of writing for many people is therapeutic, because you kind of get the old story out there, and then you can start thinking about that new story. FOMO. I'm curious, like, given all of these experiences and all that you've learned, you mentioned being grateful, and gratitude is such an important part of, everyday life, but we forget sometimes, and, we wake up on the wrong side of the bed, and, you go to the store to buy something and there's a line, and it's easy to just sort of get upset. And a normal day, he's just like, we inject a lot of negativity into it sometimes, right? And I'm curious,
Sure.
for you, like it's a Tuesday at 3 p.m. Are you just like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad to be here? Or after a period of time, do you also just, life becomes more normal and you sort of just go back into the flow? Like, does it stick with you?
It definitely sticks with you in a way. I mean, I think once you've had something like that, you can always go back to it and lean on the experience. And it's funny, you mentioned Bruce's book, or I think you just mentioned Bruce, but his book, Life is in the Transitions, is incredible. And having that narrative for me to go back to is incredibly helpful, right? So I started initially writing when I was, pretty fresh out of the hospital, and I knew, these gains are not going to come easy. And I'm going to keep showing up every day, and it's going to be really hard, and I'm not going to feel like I'm getting anywhere. And so therefore, like, I need to track the input, and I'm just going to write down, what's going on. And so you go back to that point in time, and I have, just lists of exercises. And then, as I needed to evolve out of just being, the rehab person, you start writing down lessons, thoughts throughout the day, different things in a journal, and then you have that to go back to. And so, of course, silly things can upset me, and I'm, just like everyone else in that regard. But I think you have that perspective gained from the experience that you can always kind of sit down and meditate on or think about and say, okay, I could be back there. I mean, I remember I was in just a crazy amount of pain one time in the hospital, and the doctor said, well, would you like to go back to not feeling again? And I was like, no, let's get down to the gym and keep going. And so that's, another one where, you can always sort of lean on it if you need to.
Wow, that doctor, that's amazing. Amazing. Would you like to go back to not feeling anything at all? That's some real talk there. Now, by the way, everybody listening, Bruce Feiler, Life's in the Transition, he came on FOMO Sapiens in the summer of 2020. So go find that. It's one of my, we've rerun it, in fact, as a best of, because it's one of my favorite conversations. Now, Mike, I do want to talk about here, you sent me something you've been writing, which is about the lessons of recovery. And there were a couple I wanted you to just hit on, because I thought they were really great. Just things for all of us to think about in terms of, our day-to-day life, because you're right. Like, we all fall into the trap of just like doing things and being in our routines and not stepping back to say, like, smell the roses, right? Or just be appreciative of our health or our family, or just the fact that maybe, like, you are in a long line, but like you have the money to buy that bagel. This is my morning this morning.
Right. There could be someone really interesting in that line.
Totally. So my question for you is really, take us through we're going to do 3 here, but the first one is, you say, stay open-minded, try things. The solution you need might be right in front of you. I'm curious if you have an anecdote that showed that to you.
Yeah. I mean, there were tons of things that I tried, and there were, I'll give you failures and successes, right? I mean, I tried like these different forms of acupuncture. Some of them worked. Some of them, I tried this like electro one that totally didn't work and was really uncomfortable. And, really everything under the sun, I was kind of willing to throw at the problem. And then, it was amazing just what part chance encounters played in the whole thing. I mean, I remember there was one time where I was sort of at the beach in Miami with some friends, and I was still very beat up, and that was kind of where I had gone to sort of base my recovery, and was just speaking with some people I had happened to meet there. I'd never met them in my life, just struck up a conversation with strangers. They said, no way, like this just happened to a friend of ours too. He's at this place called Paralysis, which, focused almost exclusively on training professional athletes and spinal cord patients. Never would have found it if it weren't for that chance encounter. And that was a place where I really sort of, got to a next level and enabled myself to do a whole nother level of things. So you just never quite know what's out there, sort of right in front of you. And that's why it's so important to be sort of grateful and open-minded, because if you're kind of kicking the dust around, you're not going to see all those little positive nuggets that are just laying right in front of you.
Yeah, and be curious, because the easy thing to say is, I tried that already. I've gone to that kind of thing and it's not going to work for me. But,
right.
You never know what you're going to find. Now, the second is, I like this one. This sounds fun. Dance and enjoy. Remember the time you couldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. I mean, and that sort of, dovetails into one of the questions that you asked earlier about, what do you do now with life? But I actually wrote that down, I'd say a month after I got out of the hospital, and kind of was standing in front of a mirror and just did like a little jig. And I was like, hey, you know what? This is awesome. I never want to stop doing this. And it's true. I mean, the laughs that you have, with loved ones and friends, and just the ability to go hit a dance floor, and even celebrating little things. I mean, again, like those first sips of fresh air and first time outside being in the sun, and you need to go enjoy your life. It's a privilege to be here.
Final one. You said the world is a hard place. Be kind toward others and yourself. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it is, a tough place. I mean, you just encounter things out there. I saw a teenage girl who was, walking for the first time and sort of wasn't supposed to. And then, her insurance got cut off, or, different things that happened to me along the way, or, it's a tough place to exist, but I think you can only make it easier on yourself by, kindness towards other people, because that's just going to open doors that you never knew might exist. And I think, the example that I kind of talked through earlier of, finding Paralysis in the place that I need to be just came by way of, being kind and open to people that were just sitting next to me. And you sort of never know. I mean, like, there was a time where I was standing in line at a Rite Aid. My hands were, pretty messed up, and I couldn't really hold all the items I need to. And, I kind of rush up to the counter, and a guy's standing there, and he just explodes at me, of like, what are you doing? Get the F out of my space, And I sort of just backed off, and, you think of it later. I was like, I don't know what, that guy went through that morning, or what anyone else is going through at any particular point in time. But it's a good thing to be aware of, even when things are easy for you, it's not an easy world all the time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think if you didn't learn that from the pandemic, you missed an opportunity, because I would agree, like, my ability to just be unkind to somebody went way down, because I think we all had to learn to put ourselves in other people's shoes, and also that life is short. And if you're focusing on the negative, you're missing, a perfectly nice day that you could do something a lot better.
Correct.
Everybody, if you want to learn more about Mike, you can check out mikeott.net. That's mikeott.net. If you want to find him on Instagram, he is at mikeott1414. Mike Ott, so glad to have you here, and thank you so much for telling your story.
Thanks a lot for having me.
FOMO. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and recommend it to your friends. And as always, you can find me on Instagram at Patrick J. McGinnis, on Twitter at PJ McGinnis, and on the web at FOMOSapiens.com or PatrickMcGinnis.com, where you can get all kinds of free resources to live a more decisive and entrepreneurial life. FOMO Sapiens is recorded in New York City. Theme music is by Mike McGinnis, and editing and post-production is by Josh Elstro. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and recommend it to your friends. And as always, you can find me at FOMOSapiens.com and at PatrickMcGinnis.com. To advertise on FOMO Sapiens, reach out to contact@FOMOSapiens.com. FOMO.